Hello friends, and welcome back to the shop. So we are about to begin shaping the shank of this Cob modification. And to do that, I'm going to begin by taking off this bottom portion, just sort of ferrying a curve up to this section that I've turned down. So it's going to shorten up a little bit here and then sort of curve up into this. And then on the top, what I will do, I'll do that on a belt sander, just to sort of make that, or get close to it on a belt sander, just to make that quick. And then on the top end here, I'm going to use one of these little sanding drums to kind of cut in there. And sorry, you can't see that, but just to cut in this portion right here, because I want this to kind of curve down and then come up. Again, to meet this this turned section. So this will just be some rough shaping with the belt sander and the sanding drum, and then we'll be doing hand carving from there on out. So I'll go ahead and start that, and I'll bring you back after the rough sanding is done. Okay, so we've done the rough sanding, or at least this part of the rough sanding, and you can see I've angled off the bottom here so that it's sort of coming up to meet that turned section. And here I've used the sanding drum to put a little curve into this part right here. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to use the belt sander again to take this edge down a bit so that we can bring that a little bit closer to the turn section. And then I will probably do the same on the sides here, just to angle them in a bit. The idea is that the part that's meeting the cob is going to stay its full diameter, and then it's going to taper down into that stem. So hopefully we'll be able to get close to that just with the rough sanding, and then do the hand carving, which is going to take a bit more time. So I'll do a bit more on the belt sander, and I will bring you back as soon as that's done. Okay, so I've done about as much of the rough sanding as I'm really comfortable doing. You can see this is definitely starting to take shape now, almost looking like a pipe. And what we've done is gotten rid of that edge that was here, and I've actually sort of rough rounded this at this point. So I took the edges down a bit. You can see it's now more cone shaped. And from this point on, really all that remains to do, and I say all that remains to do as if it's a quick and easy job, but I'll be taking some of these carving tools and actually just sort of very slowly carving away. That didn't go very well. Very slowly carving away and getting us to the final shape that we want. I'll then use some sandpaper and files to do the final refinement of the shape. And I'll bring you back at some point between now and the finished product to show you how that's coming along. Okay folks, so after a lot of filing and sanding and everything else, we've got what I think is pretty much the final shape for the shank. Now this has still been rough sanded, so we are going to need to do some some higher grit sanding before we're calling it done. It's still very rough, but the shape is there. The shape is what I'm looking for. And I took the tape off of the stem blank just to refit that. And you can see that I've wound up reducing the shank diameter just a little bit, so I'm going to need to reshape the stem a little just to fit it to the shank properly, and that's easy enough to do. And at that point I think we will be ready to sort of set this aside for a bit and focus in on the bowl. Either the coloring of the bowl, or we could start working on the stem. Haven't decided which yet, so I'll think about that while I refit the stem blank to the shank, and I'll be back soon. Well folks, here we go. So I've refit the stem to the shank, so it's a nice, it's still a tight fit obviously. Didn't change that at all, but it's a smooth fit now as well, seamless. And we got a bit more flare here than I'd like, but we'll take that down as we're shaping the stem. I had to obviously take the tape off of the stem, so I don't have it marked for carving anymore, and therefore just because it's easier, I'm going to move on to work on the bowl at this point. So as I told you, I've got some experimenting that I'm doing with various colors. I'm going to attempt to match the walnut as best I can by coloring the cob. And to do that, I'm going to have to probably put a coating of plaster on this just to fill in any small cracks that have opened up, especially around here. And there's some spots you can see Missouri Meerschaum actually uses plaster to fill in these cracks that are obviously part of the cob, and some of that has fallen out, or bits of the cob might have fallen out as I was drilling on this. So I'll fill those in, and then once that dries, I can sand it down, and then I can begin trying the stain. And to figure out exactly what stain I'm going to be using, I'm using a different cob, a sacrificial cob, if you will, which is this old country gentleman that I've practiced various sorts of drilling on, and some different staining and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and chuck this up, just like I chucked that up to shape it. If you recall, I just used this dowel, and it fits on there pretty tightly. And then I'll be able to sand this down to the point where it's just the raw cob. I'll put the plaster on it, and then I'll try out some different stains. And I'll bring you back once I've decided what stain combination I'm going to use on this guy, and we can go forward from there. Well, guys, we're ready to do some coloring, which is why I've got my fancy gloves on here, because I don't want to stain my fingers. Done a little bit more shaping of this. I've sanded it down to 220 grit now, so it's pretty close. It'll probably go up to about 600 before I try to buff it, so it's about halfway done in terms of sanding. The shape, I'm not sure yet. I still might want to refine it a little bit. I'm afraid that it's still a little bit thick in sort of this section here, but I can't be sure. I just want to think on it for a little bit, so I'm not going to do any more work on the shank. I have filled this with plaster. You can see some of the voids picked up a little bit more plaster. You can see those white spots are showing up brighter. And I'm ready to start to color this. Now, the coloring, I've played around a bit with this cob that I told you I was going to use for experimentation. Tried a couple different combinations. Now, originally what I had hoped to do was to create something that looked sort of like a dark walnut color that would complement the shank here, which is made of walnut, and then paint in or draw in some sort of straight grain lines running up the sides of the bowl. Now, it turns out that there's a problem with that. No matter how careful I am, no matter how many different ways I've tried it, and believe me, I've sanded this down quite a few times now, I can't get the stain light enough to allow me to do any sort of graining without having the cob show through. And it's okay that the cob shows through. I mean, that's sort of some graining in its own right, and I do like to sort of respect the origins of the pipe in a sense. But I don't want to put grain lines on top of this because it just looks very cluttered and well, frankly, it doesn't look good at all. So, everything I've tried is just not lending itself to grain lines. So what I think I'm going to have to do is actually go with a dark walnut type effect on this and just let the cob lines be the grain of the pipe. So it'll be very obvious that this is a corncob pipe, which is okay in my opinion, and hopefully the Artful Codger will think that's okay as well. The only other option I would really have would be to completely paint this and then to actually manually paint all the grain on, and we can do that, but then it loses its appeal in a sense. It's no longer a corncob in my opinion, and also that's going to really affect the smoking qualities of it, whereas just staining this is going to have much less of an effect on the smoking quality. So I'd like to stick with the stain. That's what I'll do. If Ben gets back to me and says no way, it's got to have wood grain, straight grain lines on it, then we'll reconsider it and try painting. So in terms of coloring, I've tried a couple different things, and I'm pretty happy with this particular color. So it's a darkish brown, and it's got a little bit of an amber highlight. And the way that I've done that is I've actually used the Pimo, and I guess now Vermont Freehand, dark walnut stain. And I've put on, in this case, only one coat, but I will probably do 2 heavy coats because I want to darken this a bit more than what we've got here. And then once that was dry, you got to remember that this is not like wood grain where it's sinking deep into the wood. It's actually not sinking in very deep at all. So if I sand this off, I pretty quickly get sanded down to bare cob again. So I didn't sand it, I left that, and then I overlaid that with some of this stain that it's called a vintage amber, and it just warms that color up a little bit and brings out some warmer qualities. Now this is not the final product at all, because I'm still going to, what I do with this is once I've got the whole thing colored, I put a very light coating of shellac on it, and that's really just to temporarily protect the stain until I can get the carnauba wax on it. And it will have a coat of carnauba wax on it, so it will have a gloss finish and it will be buffed up. But the basic color is there, and I think that color is going to complement the walnut well. And that's not at all obvious in the state the walnut's currently in. So to show you that, I'm going to take a little bit of alcohol and wipe it on the walnut, and that'll reveal the color and the grain that we're going to have once the walnut is buffed and polished and coated with wax. So that gives you some idea of what we're looking at, and I think they're going to complement well. The walnut is showing up a little bit more pinkish on the camera than it is in real life, and you might have noticed I experimented a little bit with some pinkish overlays there, but I do think that's just looking kind of ridiculous, whereas this is looking a bit more like a natural match. So I think we're going to go for this. Now we can always put some stain on the walnut as well if we need to sort of tie it in a bit better, and that's something that I will consider doing as we get closer to that time. But for right now, we're going to just color this using this method. So that's going to be 2 coats of dark walnut, and then 1 coat of the amber as an overlay. So I'll start that off, and then I will actually bring you back when it is done, because the process is not an exciting one, and it's not anything that you haven't seen before. We're going to use the dark walnut stain, and as I've told you before, these are fairly potent stains, so you don't want to get them on your hands, and that's why I'm wearing gloves. You also really don't want to spill this on your workbench. And we'll just take some of this, hold the cob, and just begin applying it. And you can see it goes on almost black at first. And the combination of the cob and the plaster can be very thirsty, so it's not like a briar pipe where you can pretty much cover the whole pipe with just one dip in the stain. You've got to use a fair amount of stain for this. But I've got a fair amount of stain, so that's not a problem. So I think you're getting the basic idea. So I will continue with this, and I'll bring you back when it is completed. Okay folks, so I'm done the dark walnut stain now, and you can see that's starting to appear a bit brownish. It certainly is dark. It's not uniform. It's seeping into the cob as you might expect. One thing that I should have mentioned when I was doing when I was talking about the plastering process is that one of the reasons that I do the plastering before I stain, before I put any stain on. I mean, obviously I do it before I stain it because I don't want to have white spots all over it. But the cob is actually quite porous, and the hope is that you will at least minimize some of the stain seeping through. But the truth is, I've found with this and with other Cob modifications that I've done, that it's very difficult to not get the stain to seep through the wall. And as you see here, as we look inside, there are definitely places where the stain has seeped through. And unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that. That is not, you can see it's actually got the Cob pattern, so it's not that that has leaked in or dropped in from above. That actually has gone through the wall of the Cob, and it can't be sanded out. It's just, it's part of the pipe now. The good news is that I've done this. This happened on the Stubby Country. It's happened on some other Cobs that I was just playing with, trying to work out different staining techniques. And once the alcohol evaporates, there's absolutely no flavor imparted by it. And when we pipe mud this, we're going to put pipe mud on the bottom. I'll also put a skim coating of pipe mud around the inside, just to sort of promote cake formation over that, and to make sure that that the Artful Codger doesn't have any issues when he first lights this one up. But I just wanted to show you that it gives you some idea, and that's part of why these Cobs are such great smokers. Is that the porosity of this is literally on par with that of Meerschaum. So the Missouri Meerschaum moniker is actually quite appropriate. Okay, so I've got the dark walnut in place. I'm now going to do the this amber, which is just a light sort of overlay coat, and I'll do that exactly the same way. And I will bring you back when this is completed. Okay, folks, so we are now done with the coloring on the Cob, at least until we see how this looks up against the walnut. But as you can see, I mean, it's got certainly some dark spots, but that brown really shows through, and that amber as an overlay really does accentuate the brown. It adds a little bit of yellows and reds to the tone, and I think it's going to look really nice up against the walnut. It does add a bit of a vintage feel to it, and I know that Ben likes that sort of thing, so I think that he's going to be, or at least I hope he's happy with the way this looks. And again, if not, he'll let me know, and we can always do something more dramatic in terms of covering it. It's easy to apply colors and paints and things like that, so it's not such a big deal. So that's where we are right now. I'll go ahead and fit the shank back on and give you some idea. And do I have, let's see if I can produce a quick brush here to put some alcohol on this for you. Yeah, just to again give you some idea of what we're dealing with here. So this'll, again, the camera is making this a lot more red than it appears in front of me. And we can always darken this up a bit to help better match this. But until we get this really sanded and buffed, it's going to be hard to know how close we are. Looking at it here rather than looking through the camera, this looks very, very comparable. Or not comparable, I shouldn't say, but they appear to be well matched. So I'm not worried at all about the colors right now. I think they're going to go together very well. So we're going to call this video to a close. We are now essentially done, unless I decide to tweak this a little bit, and I won't bore you with the details of that because it's just going to be more sanding. The last major thing I need to do is shape the stem, and so the next video I'm hoping will also be the last video in this series. In that video we will shape the stem and bring it to its final dimensions, doing all the stuff like opening up the funnel, forming the airway, forming the mouthpiece and the button and so on. We will permanently affix the shank to the bowl. We will drill out that bit of shank that's sticking into the bowl, and then we'll use pipe mud to bring the bottom of the bowl up to the right level. And at that point, and again, do a skim coating of pipe mud around the inside to help protect the areas of the Cob where it's a bit more porous. And we will then be done. So I'm hoping that in the next video we will be able to complete the Brandy Cob modification for the Artful Codger, and he will hopefully soon have a a new corncob pipe to add to his collection. So with that, I will say goodbye for now. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate the time, and I hope that you've enjoyed the video. And I will look forward to talking to you again hopefully next week with the final installment in this series. Goodbye now.